Get your filthy hands off my patient now!
Behind the door of OR3, alarms shrieked. A 19-year-old girl was crashing on the table. Delilah Lawson didn't let go.
Doctor, her blood pressure is dropping. The monitor is showing a flat line.
Do you think you know how to read a monitor? Who do you think you are, stinky black rat?
I know.
This girl is dying. Look at her! You're a janitor, not a doctor. Do your job and scrub the toilets.
The alarm behind him continued to blare.
Don't make me force you to clean with your bare hands.
What he didn't know was that the woman he had just spat on was the only one who could save the girl from this rare disease. St. Catherine's Medical Center sits on a hill above the Charles River in Boston, a teaching hospital of 700 beds with a reputation that travels farther than its walls. It has trained 3 generations of surgeons. It has buried a few of them, too. The marble in the main lobby is polished every morning by a woman nobody bothers to look at. Her name is Delilah Lawson. She is 52 years old. She has worked the night shift at St. Catherine's for 4 years and has worked as a custodian in 3 different cities for the 12 years before that. She lives alone in a 1-bedroom apartment 6 blocks from the hospital, above a Vietnamese laundromat that runs its dryers until midnight. On the nightstand by her bed is a photograph of a boy holding a baseball glove. He is 9 years old in the picture. He is still 9 years old. He has been 9 years old for 12 years. The women who knew Delilah in another life would not recognize her now. The straight, relaxed hair she used to wear pulled into a high bun is gone. She lets it grow natural now, low and simple. The black-rimmed glasses are gone too. She had LASIK 8 years ago and never replaced the frames. She's 10 pounds lighter than the woman in the old academic headshots, the ones still buried in the archives of the New England Journal of Medicine. If you held her current driver's license next to her 1998 faculty photograph at Johns Hopkins, you would not believe they were the same woman. That is the point. She arrives at St. Catherine's at 6 in the evening and leaves at 3 in the morning. She mops the same corridors others have walked all day in expensive shoes. She empties the trash from offices belonging to doctors who do not know her name. She reads a worn paperback during her 30-minute break, sitting alone in the staff lounge with her back to the wall. The book is not a romance novel. It is the Journal of Thoracic and Cardiovascular Surgery, the September issue, 3 years out of date. She reads it the way other people read scripture. The hospital's golden boy works the same building. Dr. Bradley Sinclair is 38 years old, the lead pediatric and young adult cardiothoracic surgeon, and the 3rd generation of Sinclairs to operate at a major Boston hospital. His grandfather chaired the department at Massachusetts General. His father still sits on the board at Brigham. Bradley himself was the youngest attending in St. Catherine's history. He is charming with donors. He is dazzling with patients' family. He is something else entirely with the people who clean up after him. He has been known to leave coffee cups on the floor of the surgical lounge on purpose, just to see who picks them up. The case that brings Delilah and Bradley into the same corridor arrives on a Tuesday afternoon. Emma Caldwell, 19 years old, freshman at Boston University, varsity midfielder for the women's soccer team. She collapsed during a regular season match against Northeastern, 90,000 spectators between the live crowd and the stream. By the time paramedics reached the field, she was conscious but disoriented. By the time she reached St. Catherine's emergency room, the on-call cardiologist had ordered a CT angiogram that revealed something he had only seen in textbooks, an anomalous left coronary artery from the right sinus of Valsalva with an intramural course. Sudden cardiac death, waiting for the next sprint. Her mother arrived an hour later. Senator Helena Caldwell, freshman senator from Massachusetts, 2 children, 1 husband buried 4 years ago in a car accident. She walked through the ER doors in jeans and a Northeastern hoodie because that was what she had been wearing in the stands. Nobody recognized her until a nurse looked twice. Within 20 minutes, the hospital administrator was at her elbow, promising her the best surgeon in the building. That surgeon was Dr. Bradley Sinclair. He looked at Emma's imaging. He smiled at the senator. He said the words he had said 200 times before. Tetralogy variant. Straightforward. We'll have her on her feet in a week. He did not know what he was looking at. The woman who did know was, at that moment, 3 floors below, mopping a hallway. The first humiliation came at 7 in the morning in the pre-operative conference room on the 4th floor. Dr. Bradley Sinclair was running the case. 6 people sat around the table, 2 attending surgeons, 2 residents, the head pediatric ICU nurse Caroline Hayes, and the anesthesiologist on rotation. The blinds on the inner window were open. On the other side of that glass, Delilah Lawson was cleaning the corridor. Sinclair walked them through Emma Caldwell's case in the tone of a man who had already finished writing the operative report in his head. Tetralogy variant with a mild coronary anomaly. Standard approach. 90 minutes of bypass. Home by Friday. Caroline Hayes raised her hand. 23 years at this hospital had taught her not to interrupt without permission. Dr. Sinclair, the CT angiogram. I looked at it twice. The left main is coming off the right sinus. That looks intramural to me. Sinclair did not look at her. Caroline, how many years have you been a nurse? 23? 23 years of nursing. I have done this operation 200 times. When you have an MD next to your name, you can propose the surgical plan. Until then, I would appreciate it if you would let me read my own scans. Hayes closed her mouth. A resident looked down at the table. The anesthesiologist found something interesting on his tablet. Behind the window glass, Delilah's hand had stopped moving. The squeegee in her grip had frozen halfway through its arc on the pane. She knew the anatomy Hayes was describing. She had written the only paper in the world that explained how to fix it. Her jaw set. She did not lift her eyes from the glass. Sinclair turned his head. He caught her looking. His face changed. "Can someone close the blinds? The cleaning lady is staring." A resident stood and pulled the cord. The blinds came down. Delilah disappeared behind a wall of slats. She finished the pane. She wound up her cord. She pushed her cart down the hall without looking back. That was the first cut. The kind that does not bleed but leaves a mark anyway. The second came at 11 in the morning in the staff lounge on the 3rd floor. 12 people were inside, doctors on break, nurses eating yogurt, a radiology tech scrolling his phone. Sinclair had just come down from a meeting with the medical board where his mortality rate for the previous quarter had been politely questioned. He was holding a paper cup of coffee. He was in a worse mood than usual. Delilah came in with her cart. The trash bins along the wall were full. She set the cart by the door and began working her way down the line, pulling liners, tying them off, replacing them. She did not speak. She did not look at anyone. She had done this 1,000 times. Sinclair was telling a story to 2 colleagues by the window. He swung his arm to make a point. The coffee in his cup tipped. A puddle of dark liquid hit the floor exactly 3 feet in front of Delilah's boots. Not by accident. He looked down at the spill. He looked at Delilah. He looked at the spill again. Convenient. Right person, right time. A few people laughed. Most did not. The radiology tech put his phone down. Delilah pulled a rag from her cart. She crouched. She started to wipe. Sinclair kept talking, this time about her, over her, as if she were a piece of furniture between him and his audience. You know what I always say. Some people are born to hold a scalpel. Some people are born to hold a mop. That isn't bigotry. That's biology. A young resident in the corner, first name Sarah, last name Hutchinson, 2nd year of her surgical residency, looked up from a journal she was reading. The journal was the September 1998 issue of the Annals of Thoracic Surgery. She had pulled it out of the archive that morning because something Sinclair had said yesterday had bothered her. She did not yet know why she was reading it. She was about to. Sinclair glanced down at Delilah on the floor. "You speak English, ma'am." "I'm not sure she speaks English." Delilah lifted her head from the puddle of coffee. She looked him in the eye. For the first time in 4 years on this job, she allowed someone in this building to hear her real voice. "I understand you, doctor." Her diction was clean. The vowels were exact. There was no accent of the kind he had assumed. Sinclair blinked. Something did not match. The pause was small. The recovery was fast. Good. Then understand this. Next time I tell you not to interfere in doctor's business, you'll remember. He stepped past her, the toe of his shoe pressed down on the edge of her rag as he went. Not by accident, either. He walked out. Across the lounge, Sarah Hutchinson watched. In her lap was a paper titled Hybrid Reconstruction for Anomalous Coronary Origin in Pediatric Tetralogy, the Lawson Bypass. The author was D. Lawson, M.D. The byline carried no photograph. Hutchinson would not connect the woman on the floor to the name on the page for another 12 hours. But the connection was already starting to form. The third cut came at 2 in the afternoon. The senator was crying alone outside the family waiting room. Delilah's cart was parked in the corridor. She knew she should not stop. She knew the rules she had set for herself 12 years ago about grieving mothers of sick children. She stopped anyway. She sat on the bench beside Helena Caldwell. She did not speak for 15 seconds. Cry as much as you need. Don't stop because someone is sitting next to you. Helena lifted her face. She was a United States senator. The woman next to her was a janitor. She did not have the strength to be embarrassed by either. They told me she might not survive. She's 19. 19! Delilah did not promise her anything. She did not say it would be all right. She said one thing instead. Trust the science. But never stop trusting what a mother feels in her own chest. The senator gripped her wrist. 2 women. One, the most powerful person on a Senate subcommittee. One, a cleaner. The same fear in both. And that was when Sinclair came around the corner. Sinclair had just come from a fundraising lunch where a donor had asked him a question about his last case that he could not answer cleanly. He turned the corner of the 4th-floor corridor expecting silence. Instead, he found his patient's mother, a sitting United States senator, holding the wrist of a black woman in a custodian's uniform. His face darkened. He crossed the corridor in 5 strides. Excuse me, what exactly is going on here? Helena Caldwell looked up. Delilah stood from the bench out of respect for the woman she had been sitting with. You were just what? Giving my patient's mother folk wisdom about her dying daughter? The senator tried. Doctor, she was only... Sinclair did not let her finish. The pressure of the entire day cracked. You're a janitor, not a doctor. Read the badge on your cart. Your job is to clean floors, not to comfort families, not to dispense medical advice, not to sit on the bench reserved for waiting parents. You know why your name isn't on a white coat? Because you didn't earn one. I did. The corridor went silent. A nurse 3 meters away dropped her eyes to the floor. Sarah Hutchinson, just rounding the far end of the hall, stopped mid-step. 20 people, give or take, witnessed it. 2 had their phones out. Delilah said nothing. She bent. She picked up her mop. She looked at Helena Caldwell once, apology in her eyes, and turned. She pushed her cart down the corridor. A single tear slid down her cheek. Only Hutchinson saw it. Helena Caldwell stood up. She did not look Sinclair in the eye. Dr. Sinclair, in the last 30 seconds, you have just shown me exactly what kind of man you are. She walked away. Not after Delilah. Just away from him. Sinclair stood alone in the corridor. The first hint of understanding crossed his face. It would not last. Delilah rode the service elevator down to the basement. She unloaded her cart. She washed her hands at the utility sink. She stared at the water running over her fingers. 12 years of silence. 3 humiliations in one day, and a girl upstairs whose life would end under the wrong surgeon's knife. She lifted her hands out of the water. They were not steady. She closed them into fists. They steadied. While Delilah stood at that sink, 2 floors above, a child in the pediatric ward began to choke. A 6-year-old boy with a piece of hard candy lodged in his throat. His mother screamed. The closest nurse was at the medication cart. The closest doctor was on break. The closest adult in the hallway was Delilah, who had just finished mopping the corridor outside the ward. She moved. She crossed 8 meters in 3 seconds. She dropped to one knee behind the boy. Her hand found the exact landmark below the rib margin. Not by accident, not by guess, but by the muscle memory of someone who had performed this maneuver 1,000 times. She delivered a single upward thrust at an angle no parent would know. The candy popped out and bounced on the linoleum. She did not stop there. She checked his pupils. She palpated his carotid. She rolled him onto his side, recovery position, textbook. The nurse arrived with the medication cart. Caroline Hayes, the same nurse Sinclair had silenced in the morning meeting, came running from the other end of the hall. She watched Delilah's hands. She watched the boy breathing. She did not say anything, but her eyes did not leave Delilah's face. When Delilah stood up, the collar of her uniform shifted 1/2 inch. A small pendant on a thin chain caught the fluorescent light. 3 letters etched into the metal. S-T-S. Caroline Hayes had been a cardiothoracic nurse for 23 years. She knew what those 3 letters stood for. The Society of Thoracic Surgeons did not give those pendants out to nurses. They did not give them out to anyone who had not stood at an operating table and stopped a child's heart and started it again. Hayes did not say a word. She just kept watching. Meanwhile, on the 5th floor, Sarah Hutchinson was walking very fast toward the office of Dr. Margaret Holloway, chief of surgery, with a 1998 paper in her hand. She had connected the dots. She did not yet know how many, but she was about to find out who D. Lawson, M.D., really was. Dr. Margaret Holloway was 61 years old. She had been chief of surgery at St. Catherine's for 11 years and an attending for 14 before that. She had trained with the great cardiothoracic surgeons of her generation and had outlived 3 of them. She knew what was in the archive of the New England Journal of Medicine. She knew who had published in it. When Sarah Hutchinson knocked on her door at 6 in the evening and laid a 1998 paper on her desk, Holloway looked at the byline for 6 full seconds without speaking. Then she stood, walked past Hutchinson, and closed the office door. She switched off the overhead light, leaving only the desk lamp. "You're asking me about someone who is dead, or who chose to be dead. She's alive. I need to know." "Why?" "Because tomorrow at 7, Bradley Sinclair is going to try to operate on a case only the Lawson bypass can save. And he is going to fail." Holloway turned to the window. "Come back at 9. I need a few hours." Hutchinson left. Holloway opened the bottom drawer of her desk and lifted out an old business card. The number on it was 12 years out of service. She did not need the number. She needed the moment. At the same hour, 6 blocks away, Delilah Lawson sat at her kitchen table under a single bulb. In front of her was a wooden box she had not opened in 5 years. She lifted the lid. Inside lay everything she had buried. The diploma from Johns Hopkins, 1992. The board certification in cardiothoracic surgery, 1996. The 2 STS Innovator Awards, 1999 and 2002. A German translation of her paper, the one that had made the Lawson bypass canon in European pediatric cardiology. The faculty photograph from her Hopkins years, a younger Delilah with relaxed hair pulled high, black-rimmed glasses, the white coat with her name embroidered above the pocket. Lawson, D., M.D., FACS, and one photograph she had touched 1,000 times. A small boy in a baseball uniform, missing his 2 front teeth, holding a glove in his right hand and his mother's hand in his left. Theo, 9 years old forever. She set the photograph down. She lifted her right hand into the air. Her fingers began to move through the steps of an operation she had not performed in 12 years. Step 1. Step 2. Step 3. Step 4. The unroofing of the intramural segment. Her fingers traced the motion. They began to tremble. She closed her hand into a fist. The tremor moved into her wrist. She whispered to the photograph. "I'm sorry, Theo. I promised you I would never hold a scalpel again." She walked into the bathroom and looked at her own face in the mirror. The natural hair, the bare eyes, the 10 pounds she had lost. A woman no one in the building above her had recognized in 4 years. Maybe no one will recognize me. Maybe that's the problem. At 9 o'clock, Hutchinson returned to Holloway's office. The chief had made tea. 2 cups. The choice felt almost ceremonial. Theo Lawson, 9 years old. He had the same anomaly Emma Caldwell has. His mother refused to let anyone else operate. She said no surgeon alive understood the technique better than she did. She was right. And she was wrong. Hutchinson held her cup with both hands. What happened? The boy died on her table. That night she walked out of the hospital and never came back to medicine. She changed cities 3 times. Some of us assumed she was dead. The rest hoped she had found somewhere to keep breathing. Why is she here? In our hospital? Holloway turned her cup in her hands. Maybe being near an operating room is easier than being far from one. Maybe she has been waiting for a case only she can save. As penance. I don't know, I never asked. She reached into a drawer and took out a key on a small ring. She slid it across the desk. This opens the attending changing room. If tomorrow morning goes the way you think it will, you'll know what to do with it. Hutchinson took the key. Her hand was shaking. At 7 o'clock the next day, Dr. Bradley Sinclair scrubbed in for the Caldwell case in operating room 3. By 7:30, the chest was open. By 7:45, he was staring into Emma Caldwell's pericardium with the dawning realization that the anatomy in front of him was not what he had told the senator it would be. The left main coronary artery was not where it should have been. It was emerging from the right sinus of Valsalva. There was an intramural course visible to the naked eye, running almost a centimeter inside the wall of the aorta itself. The standard repair he had planned would not just fail, it would kill her. He hesitated. 5 seconds. 10. He chose the standard approach anyway. He could not admit in front of his team that the nurse and the resident and the woman in the corridor had all been right. 2 minutes later, Emma Caldwell went into ventricular fibrillation. The alarms began to scream. Sarah Hutchinson was watching from the observation booth above. She turned and ran. She took the stairs down 4 floors because the elevator would be slower. She found Delilah on the 3rd floor mopping the corridor outside the cardiac ICU, exactly where she should have been at that hour of the morning. Hutchinson did not say her name. She did not have to. She held up the 1998 paper. Delilah's mop hit the floor. Senator Helena Caldwell came around the corner at the same moment. A nurse had whispered something to her in the waiting room. Half a sentence, half a rumor, half an impossible hope. She crossed the corridor and gripped Delilah's wrist. They said there was a janitor here who used to be. Please, please. My girl just started living. She doesn't know what love is yet. She doesn't know failure. She doesn't know anything. Please. Delilah looked down at the senator's hand on her wrist. 12 years ago, there had been a hand on her wrist like that. Her own hand, on Theo's wrist. The night she could not save him. She turned her face toward the operating room door. Hutchinson said the only thing she had to say. Holloway is waiting. Delilah bent down. She picked up her mop. She did not throw it aside. She leaned it carefully against the wall the way a surgeon sets down a tool that is no longer needed. She walked toward the operating room. She did not say a word. The scrub room outside operating room 3 had 2 sinks and a window that looked into the OR itself. Through that window, Bradley Sinclair could see who was coming. Dr. Margaret Holloway was already there. She held a folded gown across her arm and a printout of the 1998 paper in her free hand. Behind her stood Sarah Hutchinson, holding a fresh pair of size 7 gloves. Delilah Lawson stepped into the scrub room. Holloway did not speak. She held the gown out. The two women had not been in the same room in 12 years. Dr. Lawson. The name fell into the silence like a coin into water. The first time anyone had spoken it inside this building. Margaret. We need you. Delilah took the gown. Through the window of OR3, Sinclair saw her gowning up. His scalpel hand stopped above the chest cavity. He laughed once, short, disbelieving. The janitor? Is this a joke? Holloway pushed open the OR door. She walked across the room and placed the printout on the instrument tray next to him. The byline carried no photograph. It carried only the name. D. Lawson, M.D. Sinclair stared at it. His face did not turn red. It went white, bloodless. The white of a man who has just realized something he cannot take back. In the waiting room 3 floors above, Senator Helena Caldwell was on a phone with the chairman of the hospital board. She said 4 words. Let her in, now. Delilah stood at the scrub sink. She turned on the water. She washed her hands. 2 minutes, the way she had washed them for 10 years of her career. 3 minutes, the way she had washed them for the last 5 years before she walked away. Long enough to remember the woman she had been the last time these hands had held a scalpel. Her shoulders rose, her spine lengthened. The body she had been carrying for 12 years, the body that bent over mop handles, uncurled. Hutchinson watched it happen in real time. Delilah turned off the water. She lifted her hands. They did not tremble. She entered operating room 3. 8 people. Every face in masks, every pair of eyes on her. The circulating nurse, 57 years old, 40 years of cardiac cases, looked at Delilah's face above the mask. The hair was different, the glasses were gone, but the eyes. Oh my God. She stepped back from the table. Without the glasses, but those eyes. Dr. Lawson? A scrub nurse on the other side turned sharply. Dr. Lawson. The Dr. Lawson? Hutchinson, scrubbing in at the side sink, held the printout against her chest like a relic. Sinclair tried to find his voice. He could not. Delilah took her position at the head of the table. She did not look at Sinclair. She looked at the open chest cavity. She looked at the monitor. She spoke for the first time as herself. Move your hands. I'll move mine. Sinclair stepped back. Delilah closed her eyes for 1 second. When she opened them, she began to name the case before she touched it. Anomalous left coronary from the right sinus of Valsalva. Intramural course, approximately 1 centimeter. Yamanaka type B. Standard approach is contraindicated. We're doing a Lawson bypass. Step 1. Retrograde cardioplegia to extend our ischemic window. Unroofing complete in 14 minutes. She had not yet seen the open field with her own hands. She had named every anatomical detail from memory of a case she had published 28 years ago. The circulating nurse was the first to answer. Yes, doctor. Hutchinson stepped to the patient's left side, scrubbed and ready as first assist. Sinclair stood 3 meters from the table, still gowned, still gloved, holding nothing. He had not earned the right to hold anything in this room anymore. Delilah finally raised her eyes to him. She looked at him for 1 second. The look did not contain anger. It did not contain triumph. It contained something worse for him than either. It contained the calm authority of a woman who no longer needed to prove anything to him at all. Bradley? Yes, doctor. Stand by. If the patient codes, I'll need you on internal compressions. Until then, do not touch this table. Yes, doctor. It was the first time in his career he had said those 2 words to anyone. Delilah held out her right hand to the scrub nurse without looking up. Scalpel. The scalpel landed in Delilah's right palm. She did not look down at it. She did not need to. 12 years of distance from this room. 12 years of mops, trash bags, and concrete floors. 12 years of telling herself she would never feel the weight of a number 10 blade in her hand again. The blade weighed 7 grams. It felt like nothing. It felt like the only thing she had ever held. She lowered her hand toward Emma Caldwell's chest. The first cut she made was not a cut. It was an assessment. Her index finger and thumb gently retracted the pericardial edge that Sinclair had left rough. She inspected the aorta. The heart was on bypass, the perfusionist's machine humming at the foot of the table. The cross clamp was already in place. Sinclair had at least done that correctly. He had simply done nothing else right after. Cardioplegia status. The perfusionist's voice came through the surgical drape. Antegrade given 12 minutes ago, awaiting your call on retrograde. Give it now. 300 milliliters. We need to extend the ischemic window. I want 50 minutes of margin. Yes, doctor. She turned to Hutchinson. Right angle clamp and a vascular forceps with the smallest tip we have. Castroviejo, if it's open. Hutchinson moved before the instruments were even named. She had been studying surgical instruments since she was 19. She had never assisted a case where the surgeon spoke them in this rhythm, almost faster than the names themselves. Delilah lifted the aorta with the gentlest possible retraction. The anatomy revealed itself. The intramural segment ran for 9.5 millimeters along the inside of the aortic wall, just as the imaging had suggested. The mouth of the anomalous coronary was a slit, not a circle, a slit no wider than the tip of a sewing needle. Every beat of Emma's heart for 19 years had been forcing blood through that slit. Soccer matches, 2 hours of varsity practice every day, sprints in October cold. The wonder was not that she had collapsed in the stadium. The wonder was that she had not collapsed years earlier. Delilah whispered something only Hutchinson caught. There you are, just like Theo. Hutchinson looked up sharply. Delilah's eyes were on the aorta. She did not turn her head. But then the smell reached her. Warm blood, anesthetic gas, the exact scent of an operating room 12 years ago in another city. She heard, for half a second, a child laughing somewhere that did not exist. Her hand grew heavy. The Castroviejo forceps almost slipped. She whispered to herself, almost too soft for the microphone in her mask to catch. Not him. Not this time. 1 heartbeat. 2. Her hand steadied. Step 3. Unroofing the intramural segment, number 15 blade, 6 millimeter incision along the outer wall, depth controlled to the level of the media. Do not breach the intima. Hutchinson, watch this closely. You will do this on your own one day. The scrub nurse placed the blade in her palm. The first incision Delilah made in 12 years was exact to within 0.5 millimeter. The line opened on the outer wall of the aorta and revealed the trapped coronary artery beneath. The blood vessel that had been suffocating Emma for 2 decades was suddenly free of the wall that had been crushing it. The OR exhaled. Step 4. Neo-osteal reconstruction. 7-0 proline on a fine vascular needle. I'm placing the first anchor stitch at the proximal angle. 12 sutures total, 0.5 millimeter spacing. We are going to do this in under 20 minutes. She began to sew. Each stitch landed where the previous one had told her to place the next one. The needle moved through tissue thinner than a fingernail. The thread followed. The knots held. 12 sutures. 3 minutes per stitch in a normal case. She was averaging 90 seconds. She had been doing this in the air at her kitchen table the night before. Her body had not forgotten. On the 6th stitch, the monitor screamed. VFib. The line on the screen ripped into chaos. Bradley. Internal massage. Right hand. 1 beat per second. Light pressure. Now. Sinclair did not argue. He could not. He stepped to the table. He placed his hand inside Emma Caldwell's chest cavity and began to gently squeeze her heart in his palm, 1 beat at a time. The most arrogant surgeon at St. Catherine's was now keeping a 19-year-old's blood moving by the rhythm of a woman he had called a janitor 12 hours earlier. The field shook with each compression. Delilah kept sewing through the movement, eyes never leaving her thread. Hutchinson, voice tight. "Doctor, should we pause?" "No, if I pause, we lose 30 seconds restarting the rhythm. We don't have 30 seconds. 8th stitch. 9th. The anesthesiologist. "Pressure is 60/30. "Understood. 10th stitch. "Almost there. 11th. She placed the 12th stitch. The knot tightened. "Anastomosis complete. Bradley, stop compressions. Internal paddles, 10 joules. The paddles were placed against Emma's heart. The first shock fired. The heart shuddered. It did not catch. 15 joules. The second shock. Silence. 2 seconds. 3. Then a beat. Then another. Then sinus rhythm. Steady, even, real. Every chest in the OR rose and fell at the same time as the room exhaled. The anesthesiologist closed his eyes for a brief second behind his mask. Beatrice, the circulating nurse, pressed a gloved knuckle against her own mouth. Hutchinson, with her hands still trembling, looked across the table. "Doctor, may I close the outer layer?" Delilah's eyes softened for the first time all morning. "Yes, you've earned it. Start at the 3 o'clock angle, 5-0. Your hands have been steadier than mine today. You're going to be fine." It was the first clinical praise Hutchinson had received from an attending since she had begun her residency. She did not cry. She kept sewing. Sinclair stood at the foot of the table. He watched the resident he had dismissed as a child do clean, confident vascular suturing. He watched the surgeon he had called a janitor lean over the field with the calm of a person who had taught half the cardiothoracic department in Europe how to do exactly what they had all just witnessed. The realization settled over him in 2 stages. The first was professional. This woman had been 12 years ahead of him before he had even started medical school. The technique he had dismissed as theoretical that very morning was the technique that had just saved his patient's life. The second was personal. She had been 3 meters away from him every night for 4 years, and he had been too small a man to see her. The coffee he had spilled in front of her, the chart he had thrown at her feet, the corridor where he had told a room full of people that she did not belong in a hospital. Every single one of those moments was now a permanent fact about who he was. None of them could be unmade. Hutchinson finished the outer layer. 18 clean sutures. Delilah inspected each one and nodded once. Then she did the last thing herself. One final stitch of 80 proline on a needle no wider than a human hair placed under the surgical microscope. The neo-ostium anchor. The mathematical center of the whole reconstruction. She lowered her face to the scope. 8 people in the room did not breathe. The needle passed through tissue. The needle came back through. The knot tied. The thread cut. She raised her head. "Done." The anesthesiologist read off the numbers. Pressure 95/60, sinus rhythm holding, saturation 98%. Cross clamp came off. Blood flowed through the reconstructed coronary for the first time in 19 years. Emma Caldwell's heart, repaired by the hands of the woman who had invented the technique that saved it, beat in steady, uncomplicated rhythm. Delilah stepped back from the table. She walked to the scrub sink. She turned on the water. She let it run over her hands for a long time. The water ran clear. Her gloves had been changed. There was nothing to wash away. She washed anyway. She whispered something so quietly that only the camera above the sink would have caught it. "Welcome back, sweetheart. Your mother is waiting." It was not entirely clear whether she was speaking to Emma or to Theo or to both. She turned off the water. Hutchinson was waiting with a towel. "Dr. Lawson." Delilah took the towel. "You can call me Delilah if you want. Emma Caldwell was wheeled out of operating room 3 at 11:43. By 12:15, she was in the cardiac ICU, sedated and stable. Her pressure held. Her saturation read 99. Her heart, for the first time in 19 years, was doing exactly what a heart is supposed to do. Delilah sat in the corner of the room in pale blue surgical scrubs that did not quite fit her. The pendant with the 3 letters, STS, rested against the V of her collar. She had taken it out from under her uniform for the first time in 12 years. Senator Helena Caldwell came through the door at 12:31. She stopped at the foot of the bed and watched Emma's chest rise and fall. She did not cry. She had used up her crying for the day. She crossed the room. She knelt in front of the chair. She put her forehead against the back of Delilah's hand and stayed there for 19 seconds. When she stood up, her cheek was wet. So was the back of Delilah's hand. "I don't know what to say to you." "You don't have to. My daughter is alive." "Yes, she is." Dr. Margaret Holloway appeared in the doorway. "Dr. Lawson, when you're ready, you and I need to talk. Tonight, tomorrow, whenever you can sit down." Delilah looked at her. "Tomorrow." Sinclair was in the doorway behind Holloway. He did not enter. He had no words. He had used them up in a corridor the previous afternoon. Delilah looked up at him. She did not speak. She nodded once. He nodded back. He turned around. He walked away. Out in the corridor, Delilah's cleaning cart was still parked against the wall where she had left it that morning. The mop was still leaning where she had placed it. She looked at the cart through the open door of the ICU. She looked at her hands in the surgical scrubs. Both lives in the same hallway at the same time. She turned back to Helena Caldwell and to the sleeping girl in the bed. "I'll be here when she wakes up." She did not leave until evening. The medical review board convened on a Thursday morning, 11 days after the operation. The hearing room on the 7th floor was full. Senator Helena Caldwell testified first. She did not raise her voice. She did not embellish. She read the timestamps of what she had seen. The spilled coffee, the corridor, the words shouted at a woman in a gray uniform. Caroline Hayes testified next. 23 years of restraint came undone in 18 minutes. She named other cases, other staff, other patterns. Sarah Hutchinson testified after her. 3 other nurses and a fellow attending added their statements. 2 had been afraid to speak for years. When Sinclair's family attempted to call in favors from the board, the chairman declined to take their calls. Some debts do not get paid by surnames. The findings the following Monday were precise. Surgical privileges suspended indefinitely. Demotion to a non-supervisory role pending ethics and bias retraining. Mandatory review of his last 3 years of patient outcomes. His career was not destroyed. It was made small. He would not lead a team again until he had earned the right. 3 weeks later, in a corridor on the 3rd floor, Sinclair passed Delilah coming the other way. He stopped. He stepped aside. He lowered his head. Not a bow, just the smallest acknowledgement a man can make. Delilah nodded once and walked on. They have not spoken since. Holloway offered Delilah every position St. Catherine's had to offer. Johns Hopkins called. The Mayo Clinic called. The University of Munich called. In German, with a Lawson Bypass Anniversary Symposium they wanted her to keynote. She accepted St. Catherine's. Chief of Pediatric and Young Adult Cardiothoracic Surgery, on one condition. She founded a residency track open to 1 applicant a year from a non-traditional path. First generation, late career changers, formerly incarcerated. Support staff who had completed medical degrees in adulthood. Hutchinson became her first formal trainee. Senator Caldwell, with bipartisan backing, established the Lawson Pediatric Cardiology Foundation. Emma, 3 months out of surgery, became its first public ambassador. She spoke at a National Athletic Trainers Conference about the screening that had not saved her, and the woman who had. On a cold Saturday in November, Delilah drove to a small cemetery in Cleveland for the first time in 5 years. She brought flowers. She brought the September issue of the Journal of Thoracic and Cardiovascular Surgery, a special tribute issue in her honor. She brought a baseball. She sat in front of the small stone for an hour. She told her son, in a voice no one else heard, that she was sorry and that she was going back to work. She left the baseball on the stone. On her first morning as chief of cardiothoracic surgery, walking down the third-floor corridor in a white coat with her name embroidered above the pocket, Delilah passed a man in a gray uniform pushing a mop bucket. He stopped. He stepped back to let the chief of surgery pass. She stopped, too. She put out her hand. "I'm Delilah. What's your name?" He took her hand awkwardly. "James, ma'am." "Nice to meet you, James." She shook his hand the way a person shakes another person's hand. Not the social version, the real one. She kept walking. James stood in the corridor watching her go, not entirely sure why his palm was still warm. The hashtag started inside the medical community. Then it spread. Hashtag Justice for Dr. Lawson. By the end of the year, it had been seen 40 million times. There are stories the world prefers not to tell. The cleaning lady who turned out to be the surgeon, the custodian who turned out to be the one person on earth who could save the dying girl, the black woman in the gray uniform who was, in fact, the author of the technique the white man in the white coat had been taught and then dismissed 28 years later in a corridor with 20 witnesses. This story is one of those. Delilah Lawson never asked to be hidden. She buried herself. She walked away from a career the most powerful hospitals in the world would have killed to keep, because she could not forgive herself for losing the patient who shared her name. For 12 years, she carried a mop instead of a scalpel, because the weight of the mop was easier than the weight of what had happened on her own operating table. The world did not see her because the world rarely sees women like her. It looks at the gray uniform and stops there. It looks at the skin and stops there. It looks at the broom in the corner and assumes the broom is the whole story. It is almost never the whole story. The lesson is not complicated. The hands that empty your trash may have once saved a child's life. They may yet save another one, if you have the decency to look at them as hands and not as uniforms. Talent does not disappear. Grief is not the end of a calling, and no person on this earth, none, owes the world an explanation for the chapter of their life where they had to disappear in order to survive. Bradley Sinclair will spend the rest of his career remembering one corridor on one Tuesday afternoon. Delilah Lawson will spend the rest of hers making sure the next Bradley Sinclair learns the lesson without needing the corridor. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Comment below with the name of a person in your life whose talent has been overlooked. And subscribe for more stories of the people the world tried to make invisible and who refused to stay invisible. Because real talent never disappears. It only waits.
The story is over, but one thing keeps sticking with me. We usually think the worst thing that can happen to a person is failure. You try, you fall short, you get back up. But this story taught me something worse. The worst thing isn't failure, it's guilt. The kind you can't put down, the kind that follows you into every room. Guilt doesn't just hurt you, it convinces you that you don't deserve to use or give anymore. That's if you pick them back up. You're somehow betraying whatever you couldn't save. That's the part I can't shake. Most of us walk around carrying something we believe disqualifies us. A mistake we made, a person we let down, a version of ourselves we accept of. And quietly, we punish ourselves by stepping back from the line we were meant to lie. we tell ourselves it's humility. It's not. It's a sentence we handed ourselves, and we keep extending it year after year. But here's the thing nobody say out loud. The world doesn't actually want you small. The people you think you owe a smaller life to, they wouldn't want that for you either. None of them would want their memory to be the reason you stop showing up as yourself. So this week, ask yourself, what gift have you been hiding because some old guilt told you you didn't deserve to do it? What would it look like to pick it back up? If you were in the hospital or you had spoken up, I would recommend hit like, subscribe. See you next time.